Hello, this is Jason from circapcs.com, and in this video I am going to be showing you how to make a sleeved USB cable out of one of our DIY cable kits. So there are just a few tools that I use, pair of wire strippers that go from 20 to 30 gauge, pair of pliers, tweezers are very useful but probably not completely essential, and a pair of scissors. The kit will come with the two USB connectors, which are 3 pieces, the actual connector itself, plus the casing. And we'll also have the heat shrink for the connectors, as well as this small piece of heat shrink, which you'll see what that's for in a minute. We also have the paracord, and the shielded USB 2.0 cable. So the first thing that we want to do is take one end of the cable and this small piece of heat shrink, kind of place that over the end of the cable. It can be a little bit tricky to get all of the wires from the shielding, the strands of the shielding inside the piece of heat shrink. So once you get that on and smoothed out, we want about 90% of that piece of heat shrink on the cable itself, and just a little bit overlapping the end there. Then we want to heat it up so that it can shrink down. And I like to take the tweezers here and kind of pull out the end a little bit to help it tighten around the tip of the cable. That way when we're sleeving it, it holds the wires in. Here we want to make sure that the heat shrink is good and snug against the cable, because we don't want any of that shielding slipping when we're sleeving it. You can use your fingers to straighten that out. Just be careful not to burn yourself. The shrink can get pretty hot. Then clip off the excess. Then I'll heat it up one more time. And here you can see the final product. So now we want to take one end of the paracord and the heat shrinked end of the cable, and slide the paracord over that, and just gently push it on. Don't want to be too apply too much pressure here. And then to get the paracord actually sleeved onto the cable, we kind of pinch down with the hand that's holding the cable, and then push a little bit of the paracord on till it bunches up, and then squeeze with that hand and straighten the paracord back over the cable. And just repeat this process over and over again until the entire cable is sleeved. And make sure that when you're sleeving the cable, you don't pinch too hard or pull too much. Otherwise, you'll end up pulling you'll either A, push some wires through the end of the heat shrink, which you don't want, or you'll end up pulling the shielding off of the cable. So now that we've got the entire cable sleeved, I want to straighten it out a little bit, the end with the heat shrink on it, so you can see the edge, the inside edge right there. We're going to want to clip off the end at that. You can leave the heat shrink on there and try to pull that off, but I find that kind of melting it on there denatures the wires a little bit, so I prefer just to clip the end off. Okay, now we're going to slide the paracord down to expose the cable a little bit. And what we want to do is peel back the braided sleeving here, and you'll notice that inside is, in this one it's a copper wire, but most of the cables will be a little silver wire. You'll want to leave that separated from the shielding, because what we're going to do next is kind of trim off the shielding that we peeled back, and we don't want to cut that outside wire off. Okay, so now after we get that clipped off, I'm going to move that shield wire out of the way and then kind of peel back the foil. To expose the wires here, and then clip that off. You can see the 4 wires. So now we're going to separate out the wires. This just makes it a little bit easier to strip the ends off. So we'll go over each of the 4 colored wires and just strip off about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Just a very small amount. Okay. So you can see just a really small amount. And the reason we make that so small is because when we tin the wire in a second, the heat from the soldering iron will melt it back a little bit. Okay, so here we are. I also have my helping hands and soldering iron. So just kind of heat up the wire a little bit, touch the solder to it, and it'll just give it a nice little coat, which keeps all the strands of wire together and helps soldering it later. Okay, now we're going to solder to the connector. So we want to heat up each of these little pads and melt some solder into them. Get them prepared for the wires. Then we take, starting with the red wire, at the outside like this, you can see it starts with, goes red, white, green, black. I kind of like to heat up the solder on the connector a little bit first. I think it makes it a little bit softer, so then you can just place the wire on it, touch the soldering iron to it, and it melts in. This is where I like to use the tweezers. It makes manipulating the wires a little bit easier. And as you can see here, it's kind of an awkward angle with the camera. Go ahead and finish up the soldering the wires on. There's the final product. So next, going to take the shielding and kind of straighten it out over the wires. Make sure to keep that shield wire out of the way and exposed, because we're going to be using it later. Now we're going to place the connector inside of the housing should only goes in one way. It's really easy. You shouldn't have to force it, so it just slides in easily. Keeping that shield wire out of the way, and now we're going to slide the paracord back up the cable and kind of get it over the wires into the connector housing, so that when we put the connector housing together, it kind of completely covers and clamps onto the paracord itself. We want to take this little shield wire and bend it back on the outside of the paracord, because we'll want that to come in contact with the metal here. Okay, so we're gonna put this on, get that into place. It should just kind of snap in. You'll see sometimes they're not a perfect fit, so the edges are flared out a little bit, so we can clamp those down. Everything's pretty malleable, so just get it into the position that we want. And then with these the kind of clamps here around the end, I kind of want to add a screen here, but you just want to put the pliers against it and kind of roll it up, as you can see here, against the cable itself. And you can kind of, take it, pinch it against it a little bit, roll it some more until you get a nice smooth flat fit. Okay, like so. Alright, so now we're going to take the cable and stretch the paracord, kind of slide it all the way down to the other end so that we get all the excess looseness out, so it's nice and tight against the cable. Then we're going to take the excess here, the edge, clip that off, and kind of repeat the same process as far as stripping back the wires and everything. Again, make sure to keep the shield wire clear. You don't want to clip that. We peel off the foil, separate the wires, strip the casing off, tin them, and now we use the small connector, do the same thing with the pads, just kind of pre-solder them so that it's easy to place the wires in. These are pretty small, so it helps to have a small solder tip. Make sure they're also very close together, so make sure you don't do too much solder, otherwise it can overflow and you don't want the connections crossing. So here we start with the red again, and there will be, I know it's kind of difficult to tell which wire is going where here, but I will have some diagrams up that you can look at, and this also follows kind of the standard order for every USB cable, so you can find the wiring diagrams all over the place online. Here we finished. Okay, so again we're going to stretch the paracord back up over the wires. And remember to keep that shield wire out of the way. And then place the connector inside of the casing. Then we have this little piece that goes over the top of this one. Sometimes it's a little clamped together, so we kind of have to stretch it out so that it fits. If you have to do this, just, the smallest bit is all you need. And again, that should just snap down over top. Kind of get the paracord excess in there. We want the same thing. We want the paracord inside of the connector housing so that we can clamp down on top of it. Again, we'll manipulate these into place, get the shield wire in place, and then just roll these over top of the cable. Make sure you have a good tight fit. Here we have both of the connectors in place. And now we're going to add the sleeving, or the heat shrink. For the larger connector, what we need to do is stretch it out a little bit. Makes it easier to fit on. I do this with, as you can see here, with the pliers. Just kind of put it on, stretch them out a little bit. You don't have to do both ends, just the one, that's going over the connector itself. And just kind of rotate it around. Do that a few times. Gets a little bit bigger. And put that end over the mini connector and slide it onto the larger connector up until that little divot that you see there. And you can go a little bit before that, but that's about, where you want it to. And then we shrink this on. It was a little difficult with getting the flame and the camera and everything in place. So I didn't do as good of a job with this one, but you essentially want to start on the connector itself and kind of work your way up to the cable, and you'll see it works a little bit better, or with the smaller end once I get to that. Okay, so once we're done with that, we will move on to the other side. So it's about what it should look like when it's done. So for the mini connector, slide the other piece of shrink over the connector, leave a little bit, or I like to leave a little bit over the edge so that it overlaps along that lip there. And again, we start heating on the connector side. Just kind of evenly heat around the entire thing, moving towards the cable as it shrinks down. And you want to make sure, especially with the white heat shrink, that you do not touch the flame to it. Otherwise it will get like a brown burnt discoloration to it. Okay, so now we're all done. Let it cool a little bit. You can see the final product. Turned out pretty good. So we can test it out. Here's my poker. It's backlit, so you can see. Just plugged it in, unplugged it, plugged it back in, and it works.